Hello, my name is Todd Miranda. In this video I'm going to demonstrate how to work with stored procedures in an Entity Framework application. So let's take a look at an existing application using the ADO.NET Entity Framework. And you see that one of the first things we've done here is we've created at a global level for our page, we've created an object context called Northwind Entities. And if we scroll down to our bind data method, which is being called pretty much everywhere to bind our data back to our data grid, we're creating an object query. We're using Entity SQL to then query data out of our database. We store the results set of that into our data source for our binding source, which is tied to our data grid view so that we can display the data in our data grid view. So in our Save button, we call the Save Changes method on our object context, which is tracking all these changes for us. And then for our delete, we do delete object and to mark the object for deletion, and then we also do Save Changes. So when we call Save Changes, it's the job of the object context who's been tracking all the changes in our entities or entity. It's the job of the object context to then write that data back to our database. And that handles deletes, inserts, and updates. But those deletes, inserts, and updates are dynamic queries that are generated for us by the object context. What if we wanted to use stored procedures to handle those particular functions? Well, we can do that with Entity Framework. It's not very hard to do, so let's take a look at how we would go about accomplishing that. First of all, let's go ahead and run the application, see what it looks like right now, so we've got a good baseline. So here's our data coming back. We can filter our data. We can go in here and we can make updates to our data. Alright, save that back to the database. So we'll do apply filter again to retrieve data again, make sure that that actually did get committed to the database, and it did. So you see that we've got interactivity back and forth between our database. Let's go into our Solution Explorer and let's double click on our nwin.edmx, our data context here, or our entity model. And you see that we've got 3 entities that were created from our database. You can also see down here that we've got our mappings. So let's take a look at our customer mapping, and you can see that we have our database columns and our entity properties, and we've mapped between the two. And that's located in the Map Entity to Tables/Views section. But there's another section here, Map Entity to Functions. And if you go to that, notice that we have select Insert Function, Update Function, and Delete Function. So perhaps we could put Store Procedures there. If we go over to our Northwind Model Store in our model browser, you see that the tables that are listed are the tables that we utilize to map our entities to. So we've got customers, order details, and orders. But we don't have any stored procedures. So we've got to get stored procedures into our model store so that we can then use them with the functional mapping. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to my designer, and I'm going to right click, and I can choose Update Model from Database. I can do the same thing here if I right click on my store, Update Model from Database. But we're going to right click on the designer surface and click the Update Model from Database. That's going to reinterrogate the database and pull back items that I have not selected yet. So if we go into tables, notice we don't see customers, we don't see orders, we don't see order details. So let's go into our store procedures. Now I've written a few store procedures to be able to do some of these functions against the Northwind database. So I have a customer delete, I have a customer insert, and I have a customer update. So let's go ahead and select those 3 and choose Finish. Now if we look over here in our Northwind model.store, you see that we've got our store procedures we just added, our delete, insert, and update. So let's click on our customer entity, which is the entity that we're interested in modifying right now. And let's go over here to our Map Entity to Functions. And let's select our insert function. So we're going to select customer insert. Now notice when I did that, we also have a mapping between the entity fields and the parameters that go into our stored procedure. So very much just like the table mapping, except this is kind of a mapping for the stored procedure. Let's do the same thing for the update and the delete. Now, for our update, in our particular data grid view, we don't really have any columns that are set to read only, but if we did, we could set the customer ID to read only, and we could come in here, we could say use original value for the customer ID, and no matter what, if it did get changed, no matter what it got changed to, we would use the original value for that particular field when we were doing our updates. So now that we've created our links between the insert functionality and the customer's insert store procedure, we can save this and close out of that. Or we can just go directly back over to our form. Now, what's the nice thing about this is since the object context is handling all of our deletes, inserts, and updates, we don't have to change any code. Just by creating the mapping to those particular functions, we've accomplished what we wanted to with using store procedures. So let's choose the run. Alright, so here's our data coming back from the database. Let's go ahead and filter that. Alright, so here's our data item that we had manually updated previously. Let's go ahead and update it back to its original value and choose Save. And we'll do Apply Filter again just to do a retrieve of the data from the database again. And notice our update was made. This time our update was made using the store procedures as opposed to the dynamic queries. So you can see how easy it is to replace some of your functions from your dynamic queries generation from the entity framework to use store procedure so that you get advantage of, number one, the store procedure query plan caching, but also in the case where perhaps you don't have direct access to the tables and the person who is in charge of the database has restricted access in such a way that you only have access to the tables through the store procedures. This is a really great way, at least for writing to the database. This is a great way to handle that using store procedures in the entity framework.